The night was quiet, yet Elias could not rest. His home, dimly lit by a single flickering lamp, felt more like a chamber of echoes than a place of peace. He had carried the same question for years, tucked away like an ember that refused to die out. But lately, the ember had grown into fire. Do the dead know they are dead? It was not a question he could shake off, not a curiosity born of idle thought. It was a wound, raw and unhealed, piercing his mind in every silence. Elias would often rise from his bed, pacing the wooden floor, whispering the question into the emptiness as if someone, or something, might answer back. The thought had taken root after his mother's passing. He remembered standing by her coffin, the weight of sorrow pressing against his chest, and wondering what her soul saw in that moment. Was she still present, aware of the tears that wet her hands one last time? Or had she slipped instantly into a realm where memory and grief no longer existed? That question had been planted in his heart like a seed in soil, and over the years it grew into an unrelenting tree of doubt. Sometimes, in the stillness of night, Elias swore he felt her presence. A brush of air at his shoulder, a faint whisper in the corner of the room, a familiar fragrance drifting where none should be. These small intrusions unsettled him. If the dead were unaware, how could they linger? Yet, if they were aware, what was their fate? Joy, regret, or something unspeakable? Elias was not alone in these thoughts, though he often felt as if he carried them in solitude. When he visited the church, others spoke of heaven, of reunion, of peace. But their words were too polished, too rehearsed. He wanted something raw, something honest. He wanted the truth, even if the truth burned. One evening, while rain hammered the windows, he opened his worn Bible, desperate for clarity. Page after page, he sought answers, but each verse seemed both clear and veiled, light and shadow. The scriptures spoke of life after death, but not with the precision his restless mind demanded. "The dead shall rise," it declared. But when? How? And until then, what did they know? His prayers turned to laments, his voice trembling as he begged for understanding. This hunger for truth was not merely intellectual. It was survival. Elias had begun to sense his own mortality in every ache, every passing year. Death was no longer distant. It breathed near his shoulder, whispering reminders of its inevitability. And he feared that when his own final breath escaped, he might awaken to a reality he had never prepared for. Sometimes he tried to silence the thought. He would busy himself with tasks, distract his mind with daily work, drown out the silence with conversation. Yet, inevitably, when night returned and shadows gathered, the question emerged once more. A relentless visitor. Do the dead know they are dead? The weight of it left him sleepless, his eyes burning from hours of staring into darkness, and though fear consumed him, something deeper stirred beneath it, an intuition that the answer, if ever revealed, would not just explain death, but redefine life itself. That realization terrified him more than the question itself, because if the dead truly were aware, then every choice in this fleeting life carried eternal weight. Elias pressed his palms together, his whispered prayer almost a cry. "Lord, if there is truth, show me. If the dead know, let me understand before it's too late." Outside, the night deepened, thunder rolling far in the distance. Elias did not yet know that his desperate question would soon summon whispers from beyond the veil, whispers that would follow him into every shadow. And with that whispering dread he felt the first stirrings of a presence that would not leave him alone. The storm outside had not yet broken. Thunder crawled across the horizon, and the wind rattled Elias's windows like a warning at his doorstep. He sat at the edge of his bed, body tense, listening, not just to the storm, but to the silence that followed each roll of thunder. Silence that seemed alive, as though something was waiting for him in the spaces between sound. Elias closed his eyes, but he did not find rest. Instead, his thoughts returned to his prayer. Lord, if there is truth, show me. The words had not left his lips long ago, and yet the air around him seemed to respond. A hush deeper than silence pressed upon his chest. And then came the whisper. It was not clear, not language as he knew it, but a murmur that stirred within the walls of his mind. Soft, elusive, like the rustle of leaves in the night. He opened his eyes quickly, heart racing. The room was still. The lamp still flickered. Nothing moved. Yet Elias knew. He was not alone. He had felt it before, faintly, after his mother's death. A breath at his shoulder, a sudden chill in the air. The sense of being watched by eyes unseen. He used to dismiss these impressions as grief twisting his senses. But tonight, they grew stronger, undeniable. The whispers curled around his spirit, pressing closer, as though someone long departed lingered near. Elias whispered back, though his voice shook. "Who's there?" The silence swallowed his question. For a moment, he thought he had imagined it all. Then the whisper returned, faint, but sharper, like wind finding its way through a crack in stone. He could not make out the words, only the urgency. The presence did not feel cruel, but it was heavy, burdened, restless, aching to be heard. Fear clawed at him. He pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders, though it offered no protection. His mind raced. Was it my mother? Was it another soul? Do they call because no? The storm struck then, lightning spilling light through the window. For the briefest instant, Elias thought he saw movement in the corner of the room, a shadow shaped almost like a person, yet thin, fragmented, dissolving as quickly as it appeared. His pulse quickened. He pressed his palms together, whispering prayers against the fear. But fear could not silence the curiosity. When the lightning faded, Elias searched the corner with wide eyes. Nothing remained, only darkness. And yet, the whispers continued, weaving themselves into the storm, until they felt as if they rose from within him rather than outside. Exhaustion overcame fear. He slumped back onto his bed, listening to the murmurs. Sleep pulled at his heavy eyes, and in that blurred space between waking and dreaming, the whispers grew clearer. He heard his name, faint, trembling. Elias. He gasped, sitting upright. The sound had pierced him like a knife, undeniable, intimate. The storm raged louder, but the room itself felt unbearably still, as though time had paused to let him hear. Tears pricked his eyes. If the dead called to him, then surely they were aware. Surely they knew. But what did they want? Why reach for him? Why now? The storm began to soften, the thunder fading into distant rumbles. The whispers, too, retreated into silence, leaving Elias trembling in the dark. He could not decide if he was comforted or cursed. His prayer had been answered, not with clarity, but with haunting presence. that left him desperate for understanding. Elias knew he could not carry this alone. He needed to share it, to test the reality of what he had heard. Tomorrow, he would seek out the only person he trusted enough to confide in, a friend who had never believed in such things. And as Elias lay back, staring into the fading storm, he already dreaded the doubt that would soon confront him. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the air damp and heavy, the streets washed clean by rain. Elias felt anything but cleansed. His eyes were bloodshot from a night of whispers, and though the world outside looked calm, his heart carried a storm that refused to die. He knew he could not bury it within himself any longer. That afternoon, he walked the narrow path to the cafe where Daniel often spent his mornings. Daniel had been Elias's friend since childhood, a man sharp of wit and certain in reason. If Elias was a seeker, Daniel was a skeptic, unwavering in his belief that only what could be measured and touched deserved to be called real. Elias knew this, yet something in him longed for Daniel's voice, a counterweight, or perhaps a test of his own trembling convictions. He found him by the window, sipping black coffee, a newspaper folded neatly beside him. Daniel looked up, smiled faintly, and motioned to the seat across the table. "You look like death," Daniel said with a laugh, though his eyes studied Elias with curiosity. Elias leaned forward, his voice low, almost urgent. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen, not as a skeptic, but as my friend." Daniel raised a brow, but nodded. "Go on." Elias recounted the night in halting detail, the whispers in the dark, the sense of presence, the moment his name had been spoken. As he spoke, his own words felt fragile, like threads that could snap under the weight of disbelief. He searched Daniel's face for understanding, but found only skepticism sharpening like a blade. When Elias finished, silence hung between them. Daniel stirred his coffee slowly, then sighed. "You were exhausted, Eli. Your mind was playing tricks on you. Sleep deprivation, stress. It can do things. Make shadows move. Make voices out of the wind." Elias shook his head. "No, it wasn't just shadows. It was real. I felt it. I heard my name." His voice cracked. "If the dead know they are dead, if they can reach out, what does that mean for us?" "For Métis," Daniel leaned back, arms folded. "It means you're letting grief control you. You want answers, so your mind creates them. But Elias, the dead are gone. That's the end of it. No whispers, no messages. Just silence." The words stung more than Elias expected. His friend's tone was not cruel, yet it carried a finality that felt like a door slamming shut. He wanted to argue, to defend what he had experienced, but doubt crept in. What if Daniel was right? What if the whispers were nothing more than echoes of his own desperation? Still, something deep within resisted. Elias clenched his fists, steadying his breath. "And what if you're wrong? What if death isn't silence? What if they know and they're trying to tell us something?" Daniel met his gaze, his expression softening for the first time. "Then why you, Eli? Why would the dead choose you?" The question lingered like smoke in the air. Elias had no answer. All he knew was that he could not ignore what he had felt. Whether vision or delusion, it demanded more than dismissal. Their conversation ended not in agreement, but in distance. Daniel returned to his paper, the wall of reason firmly rebuilt. Elias rose quietly, his heart heavier than when he had entered. As he stepped back into the damp streets, His eyes drifted toward the churchyard at the edge of town. The thought pulled at him like a tide. If answers would not come from the living, perhaps they lingered among the dead. And so, with reluctant steps and a restless spirit, Elias turned toward the place where silence and memory lay side by side. The graves. The churchyard lay on the edge of town, where the cobblestone streets gave way to soil and stone. Elias walked slowly, his shoes damp from the night's rain, his thoughts heavier than the clouds above. Daniel's words echoed still, sharp and dismissive, but Elias could not silence the hunger gnawing at his soul. If truth could not be found in conversation, perhaps it would rise in the stillness of the grave. The gates creaked as he pushed them open, the sound hollow in the morning air. A faint mist clung to the earth, curling around the weathered headstones like fingers unwilling to release what they held. Birds did not sing here. Even the wind seemed cautious, whispering only in the spaces between crosses and names carved in stone. He moved with hesitation, as though each step carried him deeper into a realm not fully his own. His eyes fell on the place he dreaded yet longed for most, his mother's grave. The marker was plain, her name etched in fading letters, the earth above it damp with rain. He knelt, his hand brushing the cool stone as if it were her hand instead. "Mother," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Are you there?" "Do you know?" Silence answered first, vast and unbroken. But Elias lingered, letting the weight of the moment press against him. He thought of her final breath, the way her hand had slipped from his, and he felt the ache of unfinished words. Questions he had never asked, apologies he had never spoken. They filled the air like ghosts, unseen but suffocating. He bowed his head, his tears staining the soil. "If you know, if the dead truly know, then let me feel it. Let me understand." The stillness thickened, pressing closer. He lifted his gaze and scanned the rows of graves stretching before him. Each stone was a life once lived, now silent. Yet Elias felt that silence was not empty but watchful. He imagined the dead just beyond a veil list, eaning, waiting. The thought chilled him, yet it also sparked something deeper, an almost desperate hope. As he sat there, the air shifted. The mist seemed to coil tighter, and the breeze carried a sound, faint as a sigh. Elias froze, his pulse quickening. It was not the storm, not the rustle of trees. It was something else, something like the echo of a voice. His eyes darted across the graves, searching, though he knew no figure would stand there. The sound grew, not louder, but nearer, as though it came from within rather than without. His breath caught. He pressed his hand firmly against the stone, grounding himself. "Mother," he whispered again, almost pleading, "if you know, give me a sign." The whisper faded, swallowed by the air. Only silence remained, heavy and unyielding. Yet Elias felt changed. The quiet no longer seemed indifferent. It seemed deliberate, as though holding something back, as though waiting for him to be ready. He rose slowly, his knees stiff from kneeling. The graveyard stretched around him in its solemn stillness, but now it felt less like a place of endings and more like a threshold. He knew he could not stay there forever. Whatever truth lingered among the dead would not be revealed in stone and silence. As he left the graveyard, closing the creaking gates behind him, his heart carried both fear and expectation. Something had stirred, faint but undeniable, and he could not ignore it. He felt as though the silence had spoken, not with words, but with an invitation. That night, when darkness fell again, Elias would return not to graves of stone, but to the chambers of his own soul. There, in the stillness of prayer, the silence would break, and vision would come. Night returned with a weight Elias could not ignore. The graveyard's silence still lingered in his mind, pressing against his chest like a hand that would not release him. He had walked away from the stones, yet the quiet that followed him felt louder than any voice. It called him back, not to the cemetery, but to prayer, to the place where questions turned into cries. He knelt at the side of his bed, the lamp dim, shadows clinging to the corners of the room. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Lord, I cannot bear the silence. If there is truth beyond the grave, let me see, let me know." For a long while, nothing happened. The room remained still, the air thick, his body weary. But then, as his eyes grew heavy, a strange awareness stirred within him. His surroundings began to blur, the edges of reality folding in on themselves. The floor beneath him seemed to dissolve, the walls bending like mist. He tried to rise, but his body felt weightless, caught between sleep and waking, between the known and the unknown. When his eyes opened again, he was no longer in his room. He stood in a vast expanse of shadow and light, a place both empty and endless. The ground beneath him was neither earth nor stone, but something that pulsed faintly, like the surface of water reflecting a distant glow. The air was thick, alive with a low hum that resonated in his bones. And then he heard them, the voices. They rose all around him, thousands of murmurs weaving together into a chorus of anguish and longing. Some cried out as if in regret, their tones heavy with despair. Others whispered with urgency, as though pleading to be heard. The sound was unbearable, pressing into his ears until his heart pounded with fear. Elias clutched his chest, trembling. "Where am I?" he whispered, though the place itself seemed to answer, "This was not a dream. This was a threshold." Shapes began to form, in the distance, figures shifting like smoke, faces half seen in the trembling light. They moved without walking, drifting like shadows caught between worlds. Their eyes, when they turned toward him, burned with awareness. Not vacant, not lost. Aware, the weight of it crushed him. The dead did know. They knew they were gone. They knew what they had lost. And in their knowing, they reached for him, as though his presence bridged the gulf between their silence and the living. One voice rose above the others, sharper, clearer. "Elias!" He staggered back, the name tearing through him. The tone was not his mother's, nor anyone he recognized. It was urgent, commanding, pulling him deeper into the vision. He wanted to flee, yet his feet would not move. The chorus swelled, a storm of cries that shook the very air. Elias covered his ears, but the sound grew within him, vibrating in his soul. Fear overwhelmed him. "God, help me!" he cried, falling to his knees. And then, silence. The voices ceased in an instant, the figures dissolving into the vast expanse. Only light remained, a brilliance that rose from beyond the shadows, warm yet overwhelming. Elias shielded his eyes, his body trembling, his spirit torn between terror and awe. From the light, a presence emerged, radiant, undeniable. It was not a whisper, nor a shadow, but a figure of glory. Elias's breath caught, his knees pressing deeper into the trembling ground. he knew. This was the moment he had begged for, the moment he both feared and longed for. And as the figure drew near, Elias realized he was no longer asking questions of the dead. He was about to ask them of the living Christ. The light drew nearer, flooding the shadowed expanse until Elias could see nothing else. It was not the cold glare of lightning or fire, but a radiance that carried warmth and weight, as though truth itself had taken on substance. His body trembled, his breath shallow, and yet deep within. His spirit leaned forward, drawn to the brilliance like a moth to flame. When the figure stepped from the glow, Elias knew instantly who stood before him. No voice had yet spoken, no name declared, yet recognition blazed in his soul. His knees buckled, and he fell forward, his forehead pressing against the trembling ground. "Lord!" The word broke from him in a whisper, raw with awe and terror. The presence stood in silence for a moment, and even that silence was alive. Elias felt it pressing into every thought, peeling away his fear, laying bare his soul. Then came the voice, gentle, yet overwhelming, soft, yet thunderous. "Elias, why do you seek among the dead what only the living can reveal?" Elias lifted his face, his eyes blurred with tears. The figure shone, not with blinding fire, but with a clarity that burned through every shadow in him. He could not look directly, yet he could not turn away. His heart pounded with both terror and yearning. "My Lord," Elias stammered, his voice quivering, "I have carried this question too long. I cannot rest. Do the dead know they are dead? Do they see? Do they understand?" The words spilled from him like water breaking through a dam. He bowed again, his body shaking, afraid the question itself was unworthy in such holy presence. Yet silence did not strike him down. Instead, the light grew warmer, encompassing him like a mantle. Jesus stepped closer, and Elias felt the ground beneath him steady. "Your heart trembles with fear," the Lord said, "yet your fear is the beginning of wisdom. You ask not out of curiosity, but because you sense too the weight of eternity pressing upon your days." Elias wept, unable to hold back the torrent rising in him. "Yes, Lord, every night I feel them, voices, shadows, whispers. If they know, then what of us who still live? What hope is left?" For a moment, the Lord said nothing. His eyes, though Elias could not fully behold them, pierced through him with compassion that carried sorrow. It was as if the pain of every soul rested there, both the living and the dead. "The dead are not silent," Jesus said finally. "They awaken to truth more swiftly than the living. Some awaken to light, to peace, to the joy of their Father's embrace. Others awaken to regret, for their choices follow them into eternity. Yes, Elias, they know. But what they know cannot be changed." The words struck like lightning, yet carried mercy within their fire. Elias trembled, clutching his chest. His question had been answered, but the answer was heavier than he imagined. "Then what of us?" he whispered. "If they cannot change, what hope is there for me, for those still breathing?" The Lord's gaze softened. "The weight lies not on them, but on you. The living still carry the gift of choice. Life is the doorway to eternity. Once crossed, it cannot be retraced. You must not waste the breath given to you, for it is more precious than you know." Elias bowed low, tears soaking the ground. His heart shook with both terror and gratitude. He had stood in the presence of truth, and it had not destroyed him. It had awakened him. And as the radiance surrounded him fully, he felt the words still pressing, waiting for more. Truth that would pierce deeper than fear and reveal the eternal burden of the living. The radiance enveloped Elias, steady and unyielding, and yet within it he felt no destruction. Instead, he felt exposed, as though every shadow of doubt, every hidden thought, every fear he carried had been brought into the open. He could not hide, yet he did not want to. This was not the weight of condemnation, but the piercing light of truth. Jesus stood before him, his presence both gentle and terrible, as if eternity itself had taken form. Elias's lips trembled. His question had been answered, but he sensed there was more, a depth he had not yet touched, a truth that stretched beyond his imagination. "Lord," he whispered, voice raw, "tell me, if the dead know, what do they see? What do they feel in that knowledge?" The Lord's gaze rested on him, filled with both fire and compassion. "Elias, the dead awaken to what was hidden from their eyes in life. They awaken not to illusion, but to reality unveiled. For some, that unveiling is joy beyond words, peace, light, reunion with their Creator. For others, it is regret sharper than any blade. They know what they chose. They see the path they walked, and they cannot walk it back." Elias shuddered, his heart aching with the weight of it. He thought of the voices he had heard in the vision, anguished, pleading, restless. Their cries made sense now. They were not the delusions of a weary mind, but echoes of souls awakened too late. "But Lord," Elias said, his voice breaking, "why allow them to know? Why not let them rest in ignorance?" The Lord's answer was solemn. "Because truth is not cruelty, Elias. Truth is justice. What is sown in life is reaped in eternity. To be blind in death would make life meaningless. Awareness is part of the judgment. It is also part of the mercy. For the faithful awaken to joy they never fully grasped while living. But the unfaithful awaken to the full weight of their denial." Elias lowered his head, tears falling like rain. The thought of souls bound in regret, forever aware, struck him with a grief deeper than mourning. He thought of his mother, of friends lost, of strangers buried in the earth, every life ending in awareness, either radiant or ruined. "Then, Lord," Elias whispered, "what of those I love? What of me? How can anyone bear such a fate?" Jesus stepped closer, and his voice, though powerful, carried a tenderness that steadied Elias's trembling. "This is why I came, Elias, that no one need remain in regret. The cross was given that the weight of sin might be lifted before death takes its toll. But know this, death does not wait for man's convenience. Each breath is a gift, each moment a chance. When life ends, the door closes. Eternity begins where choice ends." The words pierced him, leaving both dread and hope. The truth was clear, undeniable, but it demanded something of him. Elias felt the burden shifting, not upon the dead, but upon himself and all who still breathed. His heart pounded, his thoughts racing. He had asked about the dead, but now he realized the answer was meant for the living. Awareness belonged to the dead, but responsibility belonged to those who still drew breath. The vision began to tremble around him, the light pressing stronger, as though urging him to carry what he had learned. Elias cried out, "Lord, what do I do with this truth? How do I live now that I know? The Lord's voice echoed, firm yet filled with compassion. Take up the burden, Elias. It is not the dead who can change, but the living. It is you who must awaken. The brilliance surged, flooding his senses, and Elias felt himself being pulled back, the vision trembling like glass ready to shatter. He clutched the words in his heart, terrified to lose them, desperate to live by them. And when the light broke into darkness once more, Elias knew the weight he carried was not a riddle answered, it was a calling. The light fractured, and Elias felt himself collapsing into darkness. His chest heaved as if he had been dragged from the depths of the sea. The vision was gone, but its weight clung to him like iron chains. He sat upright, his body trembling, the silence of the room pressing heavily against the echo of Jesus' words. It is not the dead who can change, but the living. Elias buried his face in his hands. The truth was more crushing than any answer he had imagined. He had asked about the dead, but the Lord had turned the question back upon him. The dead knew, yes, but they could not change. Their cries were final echoes, their choices sealed. The living carried the burden of choice, the responsibility of every breath. He rose unsteadily, pacing the small room. His feet moved, but his thoughts churned in turmoil. "What am I to do with this, Lord?" he whispered into the silence. "How can I bear the weight of eternity pressing on my fragile days?" The faces of the lost came flooding into his mind. His father, who had lived chasing wealth. His friend Samuel, who had laughed at the idea of God. The neighbor who died alone with no one to remember her. Were they among those awakened to joy, or among the countless swallowed by regret? The uncertainty tore at him, yet the sharper wound was this. What of those still living? His brothers, his companions, his community. They walked unaware, spending their days on trivial pursuits, mocking death as if it were far away. Elias now saw them as sleepwalkers on the edge of an abyss. The thought struck him like a knife. If I remain silent, am I not complicit in their fate? He pressed his palms against the wall to steady himself, his breath ragged. The burden was no longer abstract. It was personal, immediate, unavoidable. The vision had not been given for curiosity's sake. It was a summons. But the summons came with fear. He knew his own weakness, his own tendency to doubt. Who was he to speak of eternity when his own soul trembled? Who would listen to him when he himself was broken? "Lord," he whispered again, his voice hoarse, "why place this on me? Why not send someone stronger, someone unshaken?" No answer came, but in the silence, Elias felt the memory of the Lord's gaze, the fire and compassion woven together. He understood then. The burden was not his to carry in strength, but in surrender. To bear it meant to live awake, to let the truth change him before it could flow through him. He sank to his knees, clutching his chest, his tears staining the floor. "Then let me not waste this gift," he prayed. "If breath is a door, let me walk it wisely. If choice is a gift, let me choose well. And if my life may awaken even one, then let me not shrink back." The heaviness in his chest did not vanish, but it shifted. No longer a crushing weight, but a solemn fire. The burden of the living was not meant to destroy him. It was meant to awaken him. Elias rose again, his body weary, but his spirit burning. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. The world had its ways of silencing voices like his, and fear would tempt him to forget. But forgetting was no longer an option. For once the truth is revealed, it cannot be unseen. And once a soul is awakened, it cannot return to sleep without cost. Elias lay awake long after the vision had faded, his body restless, though his spirit trembled with exhaustion. The burden weighed on him like a mantle he had not chosen, yet beneath the heaviness burned a strange fire. He had expected fear to paralyze him, but instead, something deeper stirred. It was as if his soul, long dormant, had been shaken awake. The silence of the night pressed in, yet Elias heard within it the lingering echo of the Lord's voice. "It is you who must awaken." Those words throbbed in his mind, steady as a drumbeat, relentless as the tide. He could not escape them, nor did he wish to. When dawn broke, Elias rose with unsteady legs and stepped outside. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of dew and earth. The world looked unchanged, trees still bent in the breeze, birds still cut across the sky. But Elias saw it differently. Each leaf seemed sharper, each sound clearer, as if creation itself whispered of eternity. He had walked through life blind, but now every moment bore the weight of heaven. His heart quickened at the thought. The awakening was not only knowledge, it was vision. He saw beyond appearances. The market crowd chasing coins, children laughing in the dust, elders bent with age. Each face carried an unseen destiny, each breath a thread stretching toward eternity. He felt the urgency press against his chest. They are alive, but do they know? Do they understand? Yet even as he burned with new sight, doubt crept close. What if this fire fades? What if fear silences me? He knew his weakness well, the temptation to bury revelations beneath daily noise. Awakening was not a single moment, but a battle within. That morning, Elias withdrew to the hillside, seeking solitude. He knelt on the rocky ground, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Lord," he prayed, voice trembling, "I feel this fire, but I am frail. Do not let it die in me. Teach me how to live awake, lest I return to sleep." A stillness settled around him, deep and steady, and within it, Elias sensed the Spirit stirring. No thunder split the sky, no vision seized his mind, but a quiet assurance rose in his chest. The awakening begins within before it moves without. He understood then. He could not run to others with empty hands. He must first allow the truth to root in him, to break him, to shape him. Only then would his life speak with authority, not as a man repeating words, but as one transformed. The realization humbled him. Awakening was not a weapon to wield, but a light to carry. And light, if real, would shine on its own. As the sun climbed higher, Elias felt the fire settle, not as a storm, but as a steady flame. His heartbeat slowed, his mind cleared. The awakening within was not meant to consume him with frenzy, but to anchor him in clarity. He rose from the hillside different than when he had knelt, his steps slower, but his spirit surer. He knew the days ahead would test him. The world had ways of dimming flames, of distracting awakened souls back into slumber. And though he felt strengthened, he also felt the looming shadow of temptation, the pull to forget, to bury truth under the comfort of ordinary life. Elias paused, staring at the road before him. His awakening had begun, but its survival would depend on what came next. The days that followed blurred into one another, yet Elias carried within him a clarity that refused to fade. The fire burned steady, But it was no longer only for himself. Each step, each encounter, felt woven with unseen threads of eternity. Yet with the fire came the shadow, an awareness that his time, like every man's, was fleeting. The burden was not only to awaken, but to leave behind an echo that could outlive his breath. One evening, as the sun sank low and the sky bled crimson, Elias returned to the hillside where his awakening had begun. The same wind moved across the rocks. The same silence pressed upon him. But now he sensed it differently. It was as if creation itself waited, listening, watching, holding its breath. He spoke aloud, though no one stood beside him. "Lord, you have shown me what the dead know, and what the living must bear. But what of me? How shall my life end? Will my echo vanish, or will it awaken another?" The words trembled into the air, and for a long time only silence answered. Elias closed his eyes, heart pounding, afraid that the voice he longed for would not return. But then, deep within, like the faintest tremor on still waters, he heard it, the same voice that had once shattered his world with truth. "Elias, your echo is not in your strength, but in your surrender. Live awake, and your life will speak beyond your grave. The final echo is not death's cry, but the sound of a soul faithful to the end." Tears welled in Elias's eyes as he knelt once more, the weight of those words pressing into his bones. He realized then that the mystery he had pursued was not about the dead alone, but about the living who choose how they will meet death. The dead knew, yes, but the living could decide what their final echo would be. He stayed there long into the night, praying, weeping, surrendering. At times he felt fear tug at him, whispering of his weakness, his frailty, the temptation to fade into silence. Yet each whisper was met with the memory of the light, the gaze of the one who had spoken truth. At last, Elias rose. His body was weary, but his spirit stood taller than ever. He knew the road ahead would not be lined with ease. He would be mocked, doubted, resisted. But none of it mattered. His life had been set apart for one purpose, to bear the echo of truth until his breath ceased. As he walked down from the hillside, the night sky spread vast and unending above him. Stars shimmered like watchful eyes, each one a reminder of eternity. Elias whispered into the darkness, "When my voice is gone, let yours remain. When my days are finished, let my echo awaken another." And though no thunder split the heavens, though no fire descended upon the earth, he felt it, the quiet confirmation that he was not alone. The final echo was already written, not in his strength, but in the one who had called him awake. Elias's steps carried him into the night, into the unknown of tomorrow. Yet within him the fire remained, a flame that no darkness could smother. The story of the dead had taught him the burden of the living, and now he knew. His echo would not be silence, but truth carried forward. Somewhere, in the unseen, eternity listened. The final echo had begun.